So I'm here to talk to you today about a story that happened to me and my youngest daughter in 2011 when she was a newborn. And a lot of, or some people know this story, but I wanted to record it mainly for the sake of my daughters so that they could have the story from me, a record of it, and especially my younger daughter Ashlyn, who this involves. So when Ashlyn was born, she was, after a normal pregnancy, she was born 8 pounds 13 ounces, and shortly in the minutes following her birth, the nurses realized that she wasn't breathing well, and they called in the respiratory therapist and they worked on her there in the delivery room. But it became apparent after a little while that she would have to go to the NICU for more support. So they took her to the NICU, and in the hours that followed, she was put on a ventilator, and they didn't really know what was wrong at that point. But by the next day, the neonatologist sat down with my husband and me and explained that she had a really serious problem called pulmonary hypertension of the newborn. And he explained that it was a transient condition, it wouldn't last. He said that, before modern medicine, obviously she would not have survived, but he explained that she would survive. But the main concern was that she would get so sick in the meantime, because these babies can get really, really sick, and then all of the other issues that come, long-term wise from a baby who's been that sick. He said that if she got to the point that they could not care for her at that hospital, she would have to be airlifted to Shands in Gainesville, Florida, because they had a step up in the NICU. They had more equipment. Specifically, they had something called ECMO, which I believe is an artificial heart and lungs that they put them on temporarily until their body recovers. Even to this day, I can't really research it that much because I get anxiety about it. So she's over it now, and so I haven't really, had the need to go back and research it. But I really have not Googled a lot about the condition even now because it still makes me anxious. But anyway, if they go on ECMO, it's really, really serious. There can be, a lot of other repercussions and things, at least at that time, in medicine. So I was really extremely worried, that's an understatement, that she would reach the point that they couldn't care for her there and she would have to be transferred and have, and just all that entailed. So over the next few days, it was really all I could handle at that point. I think at this point in my life, I have more resources to be able to deal a little bit better. Not saying it would be easy, but at that point, it was truly, I think, all that I could take. It was compounded by the fact that I was postpartum, so that's a hard transition anyway. But then I wasn't eating. I really had no appetite. I remember one time to eat a piece of toast and it just tasted like a lump in my mouth. I couldn't swallow it. I gagged on it. So I went, 2 to 3 days with little to no food. But more than that, it was not sleeping. I couldn't sleep at all. I would just lay awake at night, just petrified, totally anxiety-ridden. And I was worried, one night, early on, one of the first nights, the NICU had called that she had taken a turn for the worse. And they instructed me to call back in an hour. They were going to pull her labs again in an hour to see if she was better, worse, the same. And so that kind of set the tone for me just being petrified all night long that they were going to call me, that something, was wrong. So I wasn't sleeping. I was absolutely filled with anxiety, dread, grief. It was really almost unbearable. But the worst part of it, for me, particularly the worst part, was when we would be gone from the NICU. And, after a couple days, I was discharged because I was fine. But she, of course, was still there. So we would be gone from the NICU, and then we would have to come back up to the NICU, obviously, to see her. And the way that worked is she would come in the doors, and there was a security checkpoint. They would check your IDs, and then they would buzz you back through a set of locked doors. And then there was a long hallway that you went down to get to her NICU unit at the very end. You'd have to scrub in and be, buzzed into that unit as well. But there was that long hallway. And my fear when I was gone, away from her, we have an older daughter, so we would, try to put her to bed at night and have dinner with her. And of course, just have to leave the NICU occasionally to do different things, fresh air, that type of stuff. So when we would come back, my dread was that something had happened while I was gone. And the staff up there knew that I was really at my wit's end. And so I knew that they wouldn't call me unless it was an emergency, but maybe, she had had a series of labs that came back that weren't looking good, or they had had a meeting and decided that she needed to be transferred. And so being away for any period of time, when I would come back, I was worried that they were going to see me and say, okay, she's here, let's sit down and, talk to her about the new plan. I don't know if that was unreasonable, but at the time, that was my biggest fear. And so coming back to the NICU after having been gone was, of all of it, really just the worst for me. And so after I would get buzzed back through those doors to get into that long NICU hallway, I just felt like I would maybe just disappear or evaporate. It was as if I don't know, I couldn't even, all I would tell myself to do would just be to breathe and to put one foot in front of the other. I mean, I literally coached myself to do those things because I felt like if I didn't, I don't know what would happen. I might disappear or something. So that was kind of my frame of mind, especially walking down that hallway each time. And so after about, a couple of days, 2 or 3 days of this, when I was really at my lowest from all the, lack of sleep and eating and everything else, one day I was going back and I was taking that walk down the hallway and just putting one foot in front of the other and telling myself to breathe. And my mind noticed that there was a little scrap of paper, and it was in that NICU hallway, and it was over near the edge by the wall. And my mind kind of just, I don't know, it just kind of caught my attention. And as you can imagine, it's pretty tidy in the NICU and neat and clean. And I don't know if that's why it caught my attention, but I just thought, oh, that's kind of weird. There's a crumpled up, little piece of paper over there, and that's out of place. And I was kind of just pondering this paper, and then almost like my grief brain came back in and kind of almost, I felt like the way I remember it is like I was almost scolding myself, like, why are you being distracted by that, trivial, thing when, you have to walk and breathe and all this is going on. And so then I, snapped back into, where I had been and walked to the NICU. And that same thing happened over the next, 2 or 3 times that I went up to the NICU. I saw that little piece of paper, and I wouldn't be thinking about it. I had so much else going on, but whenever I would pass by it, my brain would kind of like just notice it. It was like it was being like pulled to, notice that little piece of paper. And same thing every time. I would think, gosh, that's weird. That paper's still there. And then, my other brain would come in and, kind of get onto myself for thinking about a stupid piece of paper, and I would, proceed on to the NICU. So after, again, about, 2 or 3 days of this little, piece of paper being there in the hallway, we went up to the NICU, and this time Richard's mom came with us. And at that time, the NICU she was in, you could only have 2 people at the bedside. And so they buzzed all 3 of us back, but I stayed in that hallway so that Richard and his mom could go in and see Ashlyn. And so they had like a little alcove with maybe like 3 or 4 chairs just for people like me who were waiting in that secure hallway. And so I sat down in the chairs and I put my head in my hands, and I was like bending, like had my head like down on my knees. And I opened my eyes, and that little piece of paper was there in front of me. And at this point I had no reason not to, check it out, because I was just sitting there waiting. And so I just had to, bend forward and pick it up. And so this is what it was. I don't know if you can read this. That's backwards. But it says, little acorns lead to mighty oaks. It was a fortune, like from a fortune cookie. Little acorns lead to mighty oaks. And I felt like 1,000 pounds had been lifted off of me at that point. So that's what it was. And I don't know, I don't know how to explain it. And I have always, I think, hesitated to share this story a lot because I don't know, it just sounds kind of kooky or whatever, but that's truly what happened. That's truly the story. So people can read into it or not read into it what they want, but that's what it was. I thought it was a sign because I was, the state that I was in, and I couldn't really function at that point. And then I found that little scrap of paper. And so anyway, later that same day, So that was kind of in the morning hours. And then that evening, we again came back up to the NICU. And just as an aside, I remember these two goofball janitors, kind of young guys, and they were sweeping that hallway, and they were sweeping at the exact point, that place where I found that fortune. And I remember they were kind of goofing around, and then they saw us, and they like tried to straighten up, and and said hi and stuff. So anyway, I guess it would have been swept up had I not gotten it that morning. But anyway, that's my story that I wanted to share and have on record for my daughters, especially Ashlyn. And anyway, I hope you enjoyed it.